The day my husband of 32 years stood in court, demanding every penny I owned, while his young girlfriend smirked from the gallery, and the moment I realized my own son had helped him plan it. I was standing in a courtroom on a Tuesday morning when my husband of 32 years looked the judge dead in the eye and said he deserved everything I owned. Not half. Everything. The business I'd built from our kitchen table. The house my mother left me before she died. The savings account I'd been filling since I was 23 years old, working double shifts at the hospital while he finished law school. He wanted it all, and he stood there in his pressed navy suit like he had every right to take it. Behind him, in the second row of the gallery, sat a woman half my age. Blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail. Tight red dress. She wasn't even trying to hide the smile on her face. That was Amber, his paralegal. The woman he'd been sleeping with for 2 years while I cooked his dinners and pressed his shirts, and asked him every night how his day went. "Hey family, quick question for you. How does this new voice sound in your ears? Is it comfortable, clear, easy to follow? If you love it, please hit the like button and drop a quick comment so I know I'm on the right track. If it's not your taste, don't hesitate to tell me in the comments too. Your feedback is what helps me adjust and grow. And if there's another voice style you'd love me to try, just say it. I'm here because of you, and I've stayed consistent because you keep watching, correcting, and supporting me. Let's keep growing together. Now let me tell you how I got to that courtroom. My name is Dorothy. I'm 61 years old. I've lived in Richmond, Virginia my whole life. I married Richard when I was 29 and he was 31. He was charming back then, confident. He told me I was beautiful even when I came home from my nursing shifts with my scrubs wrinkled and my hair a mess. He said we'd build a life together, a real partnership. And for a while, I believed him. I worked nights at St. Mary's Hospital for 11 years while he went to law school and then started his own practice. I didn't mind. I loved him. I wanted to see him succeed. When he finally started making good money, he said it was time for me to quit nursing and focus on something I loved. So I started a home care business. Nothing fancy at first, just me and 2 other nurses providing in-home care for elderly folks who didn't want to go to nursing homes. We'd help them with meals, medications, companionship, simple, honest work. But it grew. Within 5 years, I had 15 employees. Within 10, I had 3 locations across the state. My company, Gentle Hands Home Care, became one of the most trusted names in Virginia. We weren't the biggest, but we were the best. And every dollar I made, I saved. I was careful. I was smart. Richard didn't like that. He never said it out loud, but I could feel it. The way he'd make little comments when I talked about the business at dinner. "That's nice, Dorothy. Real cute." Like I was a child playing store. The way he'd roll his eyes when I'd get a call from one of my managers on a Saturday morning. "Can't you let someone else handle it for once?" But I kept going. I had to, because something deep inside me knew I couldn't depend on him forever. And I was right. Friend, before I tell you what I found in that checkbook, please tap subscribe. Stay with me, so you'll see what happened when I finally spoke up. It started 6 months before the courtroom. I came home early from a care facility inspection one Thursday afternoon and found Richard in the kitchen with our son, Kevin. They didn't hear me come in. I stood in the hallway, holding my purse, listening. "She's not going to just hand it over, Dad," Kevin said. His voice was low, tense. "She will if we do this right," Richard replied. "The business is in both our names. The house is joint property. She doesn't have a prenup to fall back on. If I file first and claim financial misconduct, we can freeze her accounts before she even knows what's happening. My heart stopped. Kevin sighed. "And you're sure about Amber? You're really going to marry her?" Richard laughed. Actually laughed. "Amber's 28, Kevin. She's got energy. She's got youth. Your mother's tired. She's old. I'm not spending the rest of my life taking care of someone who's already checking out. I'm not spending the rest of my life taking care of someone who's already checking out." I stood there in that hallway, gripping my purse so tight my knuckles went white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned around and walked back out the front door as quietly as I'd come in. I sat in my car for an hour, staring at the steering wheel. My son, my only child, the boy I'd rocked to sleep every night when he was a baby, the young man I'd put through college. He was helping his father destroy me. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't say a word. I came back home, 2 hours later, acted like nothing had happened, and cooked dinner like I always did. Richard kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was. Kevin hugged me goodbye and said he'd see me Sunday for dinner. They both lied to my face. But I wasn't going to lie down and let them take everything I'd built. That night, after Richard fell asleep, I went into his office. He kept it locked most of the time, but I knew where he hid the key, inside the old ceramic bowl on the bookshelf, the one his mother gave us as a wedding gift. I opened the door and sat down at his desk. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to know what I was up against. That's when I found the checkbook. It was tucked inside the bottom drawer, underneath a stack of old legal briefs. The checks were from a joint account I didn't even know existed. Our names were both on it, but I'd never seen a statement, never signed anything to open it. I flipped through the register. $12,000 to Amber Dawson. Rent assistance. $8,500 to Amber Dawson. Car payment. $15,000 to Kevin Blake. Legal consulting. $20,000 to Kevin Blake. Business advice. There were dozens of checks, hundreds of thousands of dollars, all written in the last 2 years, all going to Amber and Kevin. My hands started shaking. Richard had been funneling money from my business into this secret account. He'd been paying his girlfriend's rent with my money, paying our son to help him plan my destruction. And I'd had no idea. I took pictures of every page with my phone. Then I put the checkbook back exactly where I found it, locked the door, and went back to bed. Richard was snoring beside me, peaceful, content. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and made a decision. If he wanted a war, I'd give him one. But I wasn't going to fight the way he expected. 3 weeks later, Richard filed for divorce. He had his lawyer serve me the papers at my office, right in front of my staff. He claimed I'd been hiding assets, mismanaging funds. He wanted full ownership of Gentle Hands Home Care, the house, and 70% of our savings. He wanted to leave me with nothing. But what he didn't know was that I'd already hired a private investigator. A woman named Sharon Mills, one of the best in the state. She'd been following Richard and Amber for 2 weeks. She had photos, recordings, bank statements. She had everything. The court date was set for October the 14th, a Tuesday. I wore my mother's pale blue dress, the one she'd worn to my wedding. It still fit. I wanted to feel close to her that day. I needed her strength. When I walked into that courtroom, Richard was already seated at his table with his lawyer, a sharp woman named Vanessa Crane. Kevin was in the gallery, sitting 2 rows behind his father. He didn't look at me. Amber was there too, in that red dress, legs crossed, smiling like she'd already won. The judge was a tall black man named Judge Terence Howard. He had kind eyes but a firm voice. He asked Richard's lawyer to present their case first. Vanessa stood and painted me as a controlling, secretive woman who'd been hiding money from my husband for years. She claimed I'd opened accounts in my name only, that I'd refused to share financial information, that I'd pushed Richard out of every business decision. It was all lies. But she said it with such confidence that I saw some people in the gallery nodding along. Then Judge Howard turned to me. "Mrs. Blake," he said gently, "do you have a response?" I stood up slowly. My lawyer, a young man named Marcus Green, touched my arm like he wanted to speak for me. But I shook my head. This was mine to say. I looked at Richard, really looked at him. The man I'd loved for 32 years, the man I'd sacrificed for, believed in, built a life with. And I saw a stranger. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "I have 5 words." The courtroom went silent. Richard leaned forward, his face tight. Amber stopped smiling. Kevin finally looked up at me. Judge Howard folded his hands. "Go ahead, Mrs. Blake." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document Sharon had given me. And I said the 5 words that changed everything. What I found 3 weeks before court in my husband's desk drawer, the private investigator I hired at 2 a.m., and the evidence that proved I'd been funding his betrayal with my own money. "I have the receipts." Those were my 5 words. Simple. Quiet. But the way Richard's face changed, like all the blood had just drained out of him, told me he knew exactly what I meant. Judge Howard raised an eyebrow. "Receipts, Mrs. Blake?" I nodded and handed the folder to Marcus, my lawyer. He stood and walked it over to the judge's bench. Inside were copies of every check from that secret account, every bank statement Sharon had pulled, every photo of Richard and Amber having dinner at restaurants I couldn't afford, every text message Kevin had sent to his father about handling Mum. Judge Howard opened the folder and started reading. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Richard's lawyer, Vanessa, stood up quickly. "Your Honor, we weren't informed of any additional evidence. This is highly irregular." "Sit down, Ms. Crane," Judge Howard said, not looking up from the papers. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. Vanessa sat. I stayed standing, my hands folded in front of me, my mother's pale blue dress hanging just below my knees. I felt her with me. I felt her strength in my bones. Judge Howard flipped through page after page. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. When he finally looked up, he didn't look at me. He looked at Richard. "Mr. Blake," the judge said slowly, "can you explain to me why there are dozens of checks written from a joint account your wife claims she never authorized, all made out to a woman named Amber Dawson and your son, Kevin Blake?" Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Vanessa jumped in. "Your Honor, my client has every right to access joint funds." "For personal expenses, yes," Judge Howard interrupted. "But according to these statements, Mr. Blake opened this account using funds transferred from his wife's business without her knowledge or signature. That's not a joint decision, Ms. Crane. That's fraud." The word hung in the air like smoke. Fraud. I watched Richard's face go from pale to grey. His hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard I thought the wood might crack. Behind him, Kevin had gone completely still. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the floor. And Amber? She'd stopped smiling. She was looking around the courtroom like she wanted to disappear. Judge Howard set the folder down and leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Blake, I'm going to ask you to tell me, in your own words, how you discovered this account and what steps you took afterward. I took a breath. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. 3 weeks before my husband filed for divorce, I overheard a conversation between him and our son in our kitchen. They were planning how to take my business and my assets before I could protect myself. They talked about freezing my accounts. They talked about me like I was a burden, like I was already gone. My voice cracked just a little on that last part, but I kept going. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell or cry or make a scene. I went into my husband's office that night and found a checkbook for an account I'd never seen before. My name was on it, but I never signed anything to open it. I took pictures of every check. Then I hired a private investigator to find out where the money was going. I looked at Richard. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The money was going to his girlfriend, Amber Dawson. Rent, car payments, dinners, jewelry, and it was going to our son, Kevin, as payment for helping his father plan this divorce. All of it came from my business, Your Honor. Money I earned taking care of people who couldn't take care of themselves. Money I saved because I knew, deep down, I always knew, I couldn't depend on him. Judge Howard nodded slowly. And the private investigator's findings? Marcus stood again. Your Honor, we have photos, text messages, and recorded phone calls that prove Mr. Blake and Ms. Dawson have been in a relationship for over 2 years. We also have documentation showing that Mr. Blake transferred over $340,000 from Mrs. Blake's business account into the secret joint account over the last 18 months. The courtroom erupted. People in the gallery started whispering. Someone gasped. I heard Amber's heels clicking as she stood up and rushed toward the door. A bailiff stepped in front of her and told her to sit back down. She sat. Judge Howard banged his gavel. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. Everyone went quiet again. Vanessa was flipping through papers frantically, trying to find something, anything to counter what had just been said. But there was nothing. Richard had been too confident, too careless. He'd thought I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. He'd underestimated me. Judge Howard looked at Richard again. Mr. Blake, do you have anything to say in your defense? Richard finally looked up. His eyes were red. His voice was hoarse. I made mistakes, Your Honor. I was unhappy. I felt trapped. I just wanted— You wanted your wife's money, Judge Howard said flatly. You wanted to take everything she built and give it to your girlfriend, while your wife was left with nothing. Is that correct? Richard didn't answer. Is that correct, Mr. Blake? The judge repeated, his voice sharper now. Yes, Richard whispered. The judge nodded. Ms. Crane, unless you have something substantial to add, I'm ready to make my ruling. Vanessa looked at Richard, then back at the judge. She closed her folder. No, Your Honor. Judge Howard picked up his gavel. Mrs. Blake, I'm granting you full ownership of Gentle Hands Home Care, full ownership of the marital home, and full control of all savings and retirement accounts. Mr. Blake, you are ordered to repay the $340,000 you fraudulently transferred from your wife's business, plus interest and legal fees. You will have no claim to any of Mrs. Blake's assets moving forward. This divorce is granted, effective immediately. He banged the gavel. It was over. I stood there, holding onto the table, trying to process what had just happened. I'd won. Not just the case. I'd won my life back. Richard pushed his chair back and stood up. He didn't look at me. He just walked out of the courtroom with his head down, Vanessa trailing behind him, muttering into her phone. Kevin stood up too, but he hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might come over to me. Apologize. Explain. But he didn't. He just followed his father out the door. And that hurt more than anything Richard had done. Because Richard I could walk away from. Richard I could divorce and forget. But Kevin was my son, and he'd chosen his father's greed over his mother's love. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. Dorothy, you did it. You really did it. I nodded, but I couldn't speak yet. My throat was too tight. The gallery started to empty. People I didn't know were smiling at me, nodding, giving me thumbs up like I was some kind of hero. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired. I felt sad. I felt free. I walked out of that courthouse into the October sunlight and stood on the steps for a long time, just breathing. The air smelled like rain and fallen leaves. The sky was grey but starting to clear in the distance. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sharon, the private investigator. Congratulations, Dorothy, you earned this. Coffee next week? I smiled and typed back. I'd like that. I got into my car and sat there for a minute, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The pale blue dress, my mother's necklace, my grey hair pulled back in a simple bun. I looked older than I had 6 months ago, but I also looked stronger. I started the engine and drove home. Not to the house I'd shared with Richard. That place didn't feel like home anymore. I drove to my office. Gentle hands, home care. The building I'd bought with my own money. The place I'd built from nothing. My assistant, Maria, was at the front desk. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wide. Dorothy? What happened? Are you okay? I set my purse down and smiled at her. I'm more than okay, Maria, I said. I'm free. When the judge asked for my response, I stood, looked my husband in the eye, and spoke 5 words that made his lawyer drop her pen, and why the truth about who really built our fortune left everyone speechless. The week after the trial, I didn't hear from Richard at all. No calls, no texts, no angry messages about the judge's ruling or the money he had to pay back. Just silence. Kevin didn't reach out either, and that silence was louder than anything Richard could have said. I went back to work the Monday after the trial. I walked into my office building at 7 in the morning like I always did, made my coffee in the break room, and sat down at my desk to go through emails. But something felt different. The office felt lighter. The air felt cleaner. I wasn't carrying the weight of a lie anymore. For 2 years, I'd been living with a man who smiled at me over breakfast while plotting to take everything I'd worked for. I'd been kissing my son's cheek at Sunday dinners, while he sat across from me, counting down the days until he could help destroy me. Now they were gone, and I could finally breathe. Maria knocked on my door around 9. Dorothy, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. I looked up. Who is it? Maria hesitated. Amber Dawson. My chest tightened. For a second, I thought about telling Maria to send her away. I didn't owe that woman anything. Not my time, not my attention, certainly not my kindness. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe something else, made me nod. Send her in. Maria's eyebrows shot up, but she didn't argue. A minute later, Amber walked into my office. She looked different than she had in the courtroom. No red dress, no high ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a plain grey sweater. Her hair was down, and she wasn't wearing makeup. She looked young, scared. She stood in front of my desk, wringing her hands. Mrs. Blake, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I leaned back in my chair and studied her. Sorry for what, exactly? She flinched. For everything. For the affair. For taking money I didn't earn. For being part of what Richard was trying to do to you. I didn't... Her voice cracked. I didn't know he was married when we first met. He told me he was separated. He said you two hadn't been happy in years. By the time I found out the truth, I was already in too deep. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Amber swallowed hard. He promised me things, a house, a future. He said once the divorce was final, we'd get married and start fresh. But after the trial, he told me it was over. He said I was a mistake, that I'd ruined everything. A bitter laugh escaped my throat before I could stop it. So he threw you away, I said quietly, just like he tried to throw me away. Amber nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I know you have no reason to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I'm leaving Richmond. I'm going back to North Carolina to stay with my sister. I couldn't leave without telling you that. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was 28 years old. She'd been foolish and selfish and reckless, but she'd also been used, just like I had been. Amber, I said slowly, I'm not going to tell you I forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. But I will tell you this. Don't let a man like Richard make you forget who you are. You're young. You have time to rebuild your life. Don't waste it hating yourself for his mistakes. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and left. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, staring at the empty chair across from my desk. I thought about Richard, about how he'd looked in that courtroom when Judge Howard called him out, how small he'd seemed, how powerless. And I realized something. I'd spent 32 years making myself smaller so Richard could feel bigger. I'd worked double shifts so he could go to law school. I'd built a business while he took credit for supporting me. I'd stayed quiet when he dismissed my work, my opinions, my worth. I'd let him convince me that I needed him. But the truth was, he'd needed me. My money, my labor, my loyalty. And when I finally stood up and said, I have the receipts, I'd taken all of that power back. That night, I drove to my mother's grave. It was a small cemetery on the east side of Richmond, tucked between two oak trees that had been there longer than I'd been alive. Her headstone was simple, just her name, her dates, and the words, "Beloved mother and friend." I sat down on the grass beside her and pulled my knees up to my chest. "Mama," I said quietly, "I wore your dress to court. I hope you don't mind." The wind rustled through the oak leaves above me. "I won, Mama. I got the house, the business, everything. Richard has to pay me back every dollar he stole, and he's out of my life for good." I paused, wiping my eyes. "But Kevin..." "Mama," Kevin helped him. "My own son looked me in the eye and lied to me, and I don't know if I'll ever get him back." I sat there in the quiet for a long time, letting the grief move through me like a wave. Losing Richard hurt, but losing Kevin felt like losing a piece of my soul. 2 months passed. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with Maria and her family. They invited me over, and I brought sweet potato pie and mac and cheese. It was loud and warm and full of laughter. It wasn't my family, but it felt like home. Christmas was harder. I put up a small tree in my living room and hung the ornaments Kevin had made when he was little. Construction paper stars, popsicle stick reindeer, a clay angel with one broken wing. I stared at that tree on Christmas Eve and cried until I couldn't cry anymore. Then I wiped my face, made myself a cup of tea, and decided I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life waiting for my son to come back to me. If he wanted a relationship, he knew where to find me. But I wasn't going to beg. In January, I got a call from Marcus, my lawyer. "Dorothy, Richard's paid back the first installment, $85,000. It's in your account now." I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Thank you, Marcus." "There's something else," he said carefully. "Kevin called my office yesterday. He wanted to know if you'd be willing to meet with him." My heart stopped. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd ask you. No pressure, Dorothy. You don't owe him anything." I sat with that for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to protect myself from more heartbreak. But another part of me, the part that still remembered rocking him to sleep, teaching him to ride a bike, holding his hand on his first day of school, that part couldn't let go. "Tell him yes," I said quietly. "But on my terms. My office, next Saturday at 10. Marcus paused. "You sure?" "I'm sure." The following Saturday, Kevin walked into my office at exactly 10 o'clock. He looked thinner, tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. He sat down in the chair across from my desk, the same chair Amber had sat in, and folded his hands in his lap. "Hi, Mom." "Kevin." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. "I'm sorry." 2 words, but they felt heavier than anything he'd ever said to me. "Sorry for what?" I asked, echoing the question I'd asked Amber. Kevin looked down. "For everything. For helping Dad. For lying to you. For choosing his side when I knew he was wrong." "Why did you do it?" He shook his head. "I don't know. He convinced me you were hiding money, that you were being unfair to him. He made it sound like you were the bad guy. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him because it was easier than admitting my father was a selfish, greedy man." I watched him carefully. "And now? Now I see him for who he really is," Kevin said, his voice breaking. "He's broke, Mom. The court ordered him to pay you back, and he doesn't have it. He's lost clients. His reputation is ruined. Amber left him, and he blames everyone but himself." Kevin looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I was wrong, Mum. I was so wrong, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what you did for us, for me, and I'm ashamed I ever doubted you." I felt my own tears coming, but I held them back. "Kevin, you're my son. I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean I have to forget what you did. It's going to take time for me to trust you again." He nodded. "I understand." "But," I said, my voice softening, "if you're willing to put in the work, I'm willing to try." Kevin's face crumpled, and he started to cry. I stood up, walked around the desk, and pulled him into my arms. He held on to me like he was drowning, and I let him. Because that's what mothers do. We hold on, even when it hurts. 3 months later, I stood in front of my staff at our annual company meeting. Gentle Hands Home Care had just been named one of the top home care agencies in Virginia. We'd hired 20 new employees. We'd opened a 4th location. And I'd done it all without Richard. I looked out at the faces of the people who'd worked beside me, believed in me, and stayed loyal even when things got hard. "Thank you," I said, my voice strong and clear. "Thank you for trusting me, for building this with me, for showing me that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up." They clapped. Some of them cried. And I felt my mother's presence again, warm and steady, reminding me that I'd always been strong enough. I just had to believe it. Friend, thank you for staying with me to the end. If you believe that strength isn't about how hard we fall, but about how we rise, please subscribe and hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me what part of this story touched you most. I picked another story for you. It should be on your screen right now. A story about a woman who lost everything and found herself. I hope to see you there, because your story isn't over either, and neither is mine.